some open mics, so you'll be able to share a little bit of what the Lord is doing in your life. We're thankful for that. We used to do that way back when. And you don't have to necessarily know everything. You just have to be open to the Lord, right? And the Lord leads you in things. I remember, some people, because we've done ministry all over the globe, people would say, well, you're very confident in what you do. Let me tell you that I'm not confident in what I do all the time. In fact, I was speaking at a church, one of our big churches down in California, a church of a couple thousand people one time, and they have a green room with snacks and stuff like that, and a place where you can meet before service. And it was in the back of a huge stage, and it was a great big auditorium. And they said, just stay back here, and we're going to have the worship service out there, but it's a whole lot easier for us to introduce you, and you come out. So when you hear us start an introduction, just walk out onto the stage. The problem was nobody told me where the stage was, and I hadn't done a pre-walk. So I ended up in a closet for a little bit that had a sticky handle, and I wasn't sure if I would ever get out of the closet. But I finally came out on stage with a grand pregnant pause entrance. So with people wondering where I was. So anyway, when we do open mics or whatever, we all lack confidence in one way or the other, but if the Lord is in it, it's good, and it'll be really good, regardless what you think it might be. I want you to turn to somebody and tell them one of the most interesting things, either you or one of your children or somebody you're related to, one of the funniest things that a kid did ever, okay? You don't have much time to think about it, so right now, share it with somebody, okay? Okay, I think you've had opportunity to share something. This side over here had a lot more hilarious things to share than this side over here, but that's the way it is. Yeah, as pastors, you hear kids say interesting things, fun stuff all the time. We had a family that went here a number of years ago, and the kids have all grown and they've gone other places, but the kids are brilliant. They all could be in Mensa. The whole family is filled with scientists and PhD people. It's the Hunt family. For those of you that were here a long time, you know them. Well, Noah Hunt was about 3 years old at the time, and in the nursery area, same nursery area back there, after one of our services that we had in an evening, it was dark, and I was going around and flipping off lights in the church. I think I was the last one out, and so I was locking up or whatever. And I went in there, and trust me, these people are research scientists. They're just brilliant people. And Noah's just this big. And I didn't realize he was in the nursery. I went and flipped the lights off, and it was pitch black in there. And I just heard him say, not with an alarm, but he just said, whoa, he heard me whistling, because I whistle a lot. Whoa, Pastor Matt. He said, you just made it like God had it before he made anything. And I thought, that's kind of not normal response, right? It's like, I'm scared, or it's dark. No, the kids kind of come up with stuff. And then one of the pastors was telling me that they did a dedication for a little baby, and that had a 4-year-old brother, and the little boy was beside himself in tears as they were getting ready to leave the church. It was kind of after everybody was congratulating them with the dedication of their child. And the pastor said that they were going to go have a barbecue, do some marvelous things with extended family and all this because of the dedication of the baby. But the little boy was just in tears, just inconsolable. And the parents said, this is a happy day. Why are you upset? He said, the pastor prayed that we'd be raised by a good Christian family, but I want to be raised by you guys. So, yeah, you see the stuff that's going on in the brain there, I don't want to be raised by a good Christian family. I want to be here. So in this passage, Matthew chapter 18, there's a lot mentioned about kids, little children, whatever it's talking about here. There's actually 7 mentions of this. Now, there's a lot mentioned about the kingdom of heaven and also about sin. And so we're going to kind of walk through it together, and it'll all come together. Hopefully, you'll understand where this is all coming from. But Jesus uses reference to children several times. In fact, this is the 3rd or 4th time he uses it in the Gospel of Matthew alone. But so there should be some text up there, right? Okay. And I think I've got the same version that's up there on the screen. If I don't, then you can forgive me. At that time, Jesus came to, or the disciples, excuse me. I got to get it right here. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" Now, I'm sure they were doing comparative conversations. They were probably, seeing some of the things that they had done. But then there's also religious leaders that were pretty phenomenal. And they realized he was the king of the kingdom of heaven, so to speak. And so they were wondering that. And you'll notice in the next verse that Jesus does not answer that question. He doesn't answer it at all. He doesn't talk about the greatest. He just talks about who has access to be what are the qualifications for somebody in the kingdom of heaven. It says this: "He called a little child and had him stand among them, and he said, 'I tell you the truth, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven.'" Now, I'm going to stop right there, and I'm going to use a different word. I'm going to give you a Greek word, because every time it says little children or this child or something like that, there are 5 different words that we use for children in Greek. And we have different words, don't we? We've got infant, toddler, little tyke. I mean, we got all kinds of stuff. We've got children, child, kid, whatever. We've got lots of different expressions. And some of them have to do with defining the age. I mean, everybody in here is a child, right? We're all children of somebody. Well, that's very different than thinking in terms of a small child, somebody that's just kind of in the formative space, which is what Jesus is implying here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the 2 words that Jesus uses here, because in English it's all one word, and I feel like it's helpful for you to understand what he's saying. So he calls a small child, an actual little child, probably 8 years old or younger, simply because there was a different term that was used for children when they started needing to learn the law and all those kinds of things. And this is kind of a preformative stage. The word is paideia, or paideon, and for that kind of a child. Pais is the root word. You didn't need to know that. In fact, I don't even know why I told you that. There's a word for an infant or a very small child, and it's napioyu. So that one's not used here at all. There's another word that's used just generally to speak about all of us as children. And it's always used for the word when we say children of God, and that's teknon is the word for that. As huia or huioi is the word for a son or a daughter. It's kind of generally used that way. So there's different kind of Greek words, but there's an interesting other word that's used here, and the word is mikron. And it comes from what we call micro, M-I-C-R-O, only it's M-I-K-R-O-N. Mikron is the word for small or insignificant. It can be talked about just an insignificant situation, an insignificant action, an insignificant person, somebody that doesn't have status or stature. And Jesus actually converts his conversation and goes from this little child that he's sitting with to talking and broadening the conversation out, and said, unless you become like an insignificant person, a person of no standing, a person that doesn't have position, or it might be somebody who's impoverished or weak physically or in society. You got that? Are you with me? Please say yes. Okay, all right, that's good. That's helpful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert the Greek word paidion for a little child, which is what he has with him right there, and you're going to see the conversion of that. So I'm going to start again. He says, in verse 2, he says, he called a paidion and had him stand among them and said, I tell you the truth, unless you change and become like this paidion or a paidion, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this paidion is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Now we're talking about great. And whoever welcomes a paidion like this in my name welcomes me. So it's not just a matter of this person becomes great, but the welcoming process makes it significant for you. You're welcoming the Lord himself. Now, he converts and uses the other word here. He says, yeah, that's one right there. That's a paidion that's agreeing with everything I'm saying. But if anyone causes one of these mikron, who believes in me, to sin. So now he's expanding it beyond just little children. This is a term that's used for little children, but it's also used for people that are simple, people that, like I said, have no standing, no status. People don't recognize them in this world. They would be what I would call insignificant. And now Jesus has changed the terminology here. He says, if anyone causes one of these mikron who believe in me to sin, it'd be better for him to have a large millstone hung around his neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. And we're going to come back to that. That's a pretty extreme statement. The disciples are simply asking about who's the greatest. And they've got an idea of who the greatest is, right? I mean, we know what greatness is when we see it, when we're around it. And so we just assume that those assumptions are correct and they're accurate, and that when we talk about greatness, we think in human terms. This person has standing, stature, they have all these great things, and he's talking about becoming like somebody who has none of that. So he says, if you cause one of those people to sin, he goes from conversation about the greatest in the kingdom of heaven to the worst person in the world, and somebody that he uses the heaviest object that was in that land was a grindstone, was a millstone that would, and they're big. I mean, if you've ever seen them, they would grind the grain with these things, and sometimes there would be 2 or 3 oxen that would rotate it. And so there's this great big stone, and they were beveled inward, and they would grind the grain, and the grain would drop into the center part, and then they would shake it out and separate the chaff from the wheat, but that's how they would grind the flour. And these things were heavy. Some of them would be upward of 1,500 or 2,000 pounds, and it's stone on stone that's spun around. And so he takes the heaviest object he can think of to use as an illustration, and he said, it would be better for you if you tied a millstone around your neck and threw yourself into the sea than if you caused a mikron to sin. Then he goes, and in verses 7 through 9, he talks about sin in general, and he brings it back to, he'll bring it back basically to the way we deal with children. So woe to the world because of the things that cause people to sin. Such things must come, but woe to the man or the woman, whoever, the person, through whom they come. If your hand or your foot causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to enter life maimed or crippled than to have 2 hands and 2 feet and be thrown into eternal fire. I mean, now he's not talking about millstones. He's talking about eternity. And if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out, throw it away. It's better for you to enter life with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and be thrown into the fire of hell. Pretty severe stuff, right? Well, so you think, okay, now he's just talking about sin. No, he's talking about causative. He's not just talking about your own, jeopardizing your own life, but he's going to bring it back to the fact that what we don't want to do is we don't want to jeopardize the faith, the life, the dignity, the help of mikron, as well as paidion, little children or people who are insignificant like little children. Like little children are perceived, I should say. So he goes back to, in verse 10, he says, see that you do not look down on one of these mikron. For I tell you that their angels in heaven always see the face of my Father in heaven. Now, all of a sudden, he raises the stature of the mikron or the paidion. He raises the stature of those people to not just being people of significance in God's eyes, but they have their own angelic representation. Are you with me? That's pretty cool. That's really cool. I think it's cool. Yeah, it's cool. So see that you don't look down. Now he's not talking about stumbling. He's just saying don't get arrogant and look down on people that don't seem like they might have all of those qualities that would aspire to what your question is asking. Who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And then he says, what do you think? If a man owns 100 sheep, and he uses kind of something common from this, and we've heard several sheep analogies that Jesus uses, and he uses one here. If a man owns 100 sheep and one of them wanders away, will he not leave the 99 on the hills and go to look for the one that wandered off? And if he finds it, I tell you the truth, he is happier about the one sheep than about the 99 that did not wander off. In the same way, your heavenly Father, or Father in heaven, is not willing that any one of these mikron, these little children, these people of insignificant, he's not willing that any of them would perish. This is a powerful passage. He's saying, you want to talk about greatness? Let me do a reversal on you. And he's already done that several times up to this point. He said, who's the greatest? The least of these becomes the greatest. Who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? It's the servant of all. The lost will be found. The last will be first. I mean, you've got all those reversal statements. So this is right in line with what Jesus is saying. So who you think is going to be the greatest isn't necessarily that. It's the person of modest insignificance, the person that has little influence, and yet somehow the Lord does something phenomenal in those people that impacts others, because there's some unique things, and we're going to be talking about this with children. There's some unique things. And I know trust me, we had 4 of them. Well, we have 4 of them. And we've got 8 grandchildren. So we've seen the best and the worst of children. But Jesus is talking about certain qualities that I'm going to distinguish here for us and mark those out for a few moments. But I'm going to first give a kind of an illustration of just the general principle of what is here, what is in here. So do you remember back when there was a big tsunami in Asia and it just wiped out tons of people in Indonesia and all over the place in India, and it was one of the biggest natural disasters in modern history. Tens and hundreds of thousands of people were just affected, but tens of thousands died in the tsunami when it hit, if you were watching that. Well, it just so happened that our church, including you, and all the churches, roughly 800 to 900,000 churches, whatever, in the United States, and I've worked with the denomination, and so we have a thing called Bishop's Crisis Response Fund, and we took as much money as we could to help the response to a lot of our folks. We had churches that were damaged and people that died, and houses were wiped out and whole villages were wiped out and all of that. But we were limited in what we could give. We had, I think, about $500,000 or something like that we were able to give to this tragedy. But they needed a whole lot more than that. So we made an appeal internationally to some of our churches in other countries. Well, the first church to respond were our churches in Haiti. Now, if you don't know anything about Haiti, it's one of the 3 poorest countries in the world. And we have about roughly 200 churches in Haiti. And they took an offering in all of their churches, collected all of their money, and they brought it and gave it to one of our missionaries, who then referred it to us to be able to help with this, the effects of the tsunami. And the sum total was $180, 181 or 182, something like that. $180. That's not going to do much, right? But we gratefully took that, and it just so happened that I was going to be going through Asia, and I was ultimately going to go down to India, and I was also in Thailand, some of the affected countries by that. And the Lord just laid it on my heart when I was in Japan and then Hong Kong. I was in a couple places I can't tell you about, but I just decided, and I was in Taiwan, I just decided to tell some of the folks, what the need was. And by the way, we've already received some money from an international church. And I told them the story about Haiti. It was sacrificial giving for them. It's averaged about $1 per church. And we ended up getting about, I think, close to $500,000 from those other countries when they heard that story. So, who was the biggest in this story? Doesn't that sound like that story where Jesus, when he's teaching about stewardship, when he says he sees all these wealthy people putting their money in the offering, and who did he draw attention to? A widow who put in 2 small coins, and it says it was all she had. And she becomes, in a sense, the illustration of what inspires us today, in the same way that these Mikron did something that ultimately culminated in the rebuilding and the redemption of circumstances and the helping of churches in other places just because of their obedience. So there's a story there, and I think we could do it over and over again. I think you've probably been thinking of similar circumstances as I've been talking, of people that have, in the world's eyes, have been quite insignificant, and yet God somehow has ordained that this is the way he's going to work. There's a fascinating story in the book of Judges. It's Judges chapter 6 and 7. And if you've never read it, it's about a guy named Gideon. And Gideon was an insignificant person. So it tells us in the story that he was from the least family, in the least clan, in the least tribe of all the tribes and the people of Israel. In other words, he's the least of the least of the least. And God says, perfect. We've got to whip an innumerable army that's going to surely defeat everybody if we don't act and raise up some kind of triumph. So he calls Gideon, and Gideon's not even all that bold of a person. He realizes his standing, and he realizes he's in trouble if he ends up, trying to do something that's beyond his station in life. But the Lord called him, and so, he tested the Lord through a fleece, whether grass is going to have dew, and fleece is going to be dry, and then the other thing, he kept pressing the Lord. Are you familiar with the story? Okay, so if you're not, read it. It's in Judges chapters 6 and 7. It's a fascinating story. But the Lord keeps pressing him to do this. And so Gideon thinks, well, if I'm going to win a victory against hundreds of thousands of people, I got to raise an army. And so he sent out to all the tribes of Israel to marshal up a group of people who would be willing to fight. And so after marshaling the support, 32,000 fighting men showed up. And the Lord said, too many. And I don't think it says it in the Bible, but I think Gideon probably said, come again? We're already probably only about 1/10 of what the enemy's going to be. He says, no. So he instructed him to go tell the people who were afraid to go home. Now there's 32,000 people, 22,000 people went home. The majority of them, right? And the Lord came back and said, still too many. So he said, I'm going to tell you what I want you to do. I want you to go down to the water, take them down to the water, and I want you to have them drink. And I'll show you what I'm going to do, who I'm going to have go with you. And out of the 10,000 people left, 9,700 of them drank water the right way. Because your hands were considered, if you touched anything unclean, if you touched an animal that was unclean, if you unknowingly touched something you didn't even know that you touched and it was unclean, you cannot use your hands to eat or drink unless they're ceremonially washed. And so what we would normally do to keep from getting our knees muddy or whatever, we would bend over and cup the water in our hands and put it up to our mouth, right? I mean, that's how I would do it. Yeah, okay. 4 of us, would do it that way. I don't know what the rest of you would do. But 9,700 Jews knew that they weren't supposed to do that. And so what did they do? They got down on the water, the likelihood that the water was clean and fresh as it was, rather than cupping it in their hands. So they got down, they went ahead and got dirty and drank the water that they were supposed to. And then, so the Lord then said, I want you to send the good ones away. The people who did it right, send them home. And the 300 people, perfect. So I got the least of the least of the least, gathering the least army ever in the Bible, and you're going to defeat this enormous battle. Well, in the midst of all of this, it's in the 7th chapter, the 2nd verse of Judges. God goes on record of saying why he does that. And this is what he said. He said, as he's paring down, and Gideon is obviously frustrated. He doesn't know what's going on, that the Lord is not giving him much help. It seems like the reverse. And he said, this is what he said. He says, I could not let you win with such a great army, or you would think that by your own hand you won the victory and I had nothing to do with it. Are you with me? I'll tell you why the Mikron are the greatest in the kingdom of God. Because when we don't have any means and any standing or any ability, that's precisely what the Lord wants. He doesn't want highly qualified people. Every rich person in the Bible, you don't find one person. Closest you could get was Joseph of Arimathea that gave his burial spot to Jesus. That's the closest you'd get. But read all about all the other rich people, Nebuchadnezzar, he's not applauded. Pharaoh, he's not applauded. And a lot of the people of significant means. Every time he uses a stewardship story, it's something really small. He wants his disciples to feed a multitude of people. And there's 5,000 people there. And this story wouldn't be in the Bible. It's in all 4 Gospels, feeding of the 5,000. It wouldn't be in there if somebody that worked for Marriott, corporate catering services had a semi at the ready. This story wouldn't be there. Instead, what is it? It's a little kid, when they looked around to see if there was any food available to feed all these people, there was a little boy with 5 loaves and 2 fish. You with me? And God says, perfect. The Lord blesses it, and it's multiplied, and as a result, he uses the Mikron, the very little, to achieve his ends, and a lot of people got saved, changed, healed. All kinds of good stuff came out of the little. And it's that way all the way through the pages of Scripture. And so Jesus is not departing from this. He's literally emphasizing this, that taking that little child and pulling him along and saying, this is This is really where greatness is. This is where entrance to the kingdom of heaven is for those that don't have a high horse to sit on and yet find God's help and God's salvation there. So childlikeness that is akin to preparedness for kingdom qualifications. I have a few of them written down here that I think Jesus was implying. And I'll just use some other scriptures to emphasize, I think, what he's communicating here. One is in Matthew chapter 6, verse 33, where it says, but seek first the kingdom of God and all of his righteousness. In other words, we don't look at other stuff. We're laser focused. By the way, children are laser focused on whatever it is. Are you with me? They're not going to be deterred or swayed to see anything you want to reason them into seeing or saying. That's not the way of children. But he says, seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added as well. So the first thing is there's kind of a single-mindedness, if you will. It's an unsophisticated approach to life. When I was a kid, I remember throwing on my blue jeans, my tennies, my t-shirt or whatever, going to school, and I was just looking forward to seeing my friends. And the farthest in the future that I ever thought was when that bell was going to ring at the end of the day so I could go play with my friends or do something other than homework. Okay? That was supposed to be funny, but I guess it apparently wasn't. I did not, as a 10-year-old, think about the day I would retire, which I did not too long ago. I didn't think about a 401k. I didn't think about whether I'd saved up enough resources to buy a car. I didn't think about college. I didn't think about any of this stuff. I was just waiting for 3 o'clock and then to get to whatever I was going to be doing that day. So there's a singleness of focus with children or with mikron, with people of maybe that don't have tons of money to spend. Maybe they don't have standing or access in society. And there's something marvelous about childlikeness in this area, being able to laser focus. We get too sophisticated in life. We get too bogged down or laboriously enslaved by other kinds of things around there. Second thing is the very next verse. He says, don't worry, and this is verse 34, about what you would eat or what you're going to eat or what you wear. The Lord knows you have all those. He says, don't worry about tomorrow, for each day has enough trouble of its own. So now it's dealing with the issue of worry. It's not just ability to focus in the moment, but now it's not worrying about the past or the future or any of that kind of thing. It's not being dissolved by all those things. People have a tendency to worry. If you've never read C.S. Lewis's book, Screwtape Letters, it's a fun read. And if you've never read it, the idea is it's a conversation between a master demon named Screwtape and a lackey that's kind of he's trying to get in the know of how to tempt people and how to deal with people. And so it's written from the perspective of the devil, if you will. And so he refers to the enemy. And who's the enemy in the book? God. Okay, from Satan's perspective. And so Screwtape is always telling Wormwood, no, you have to focus on this or you have to focus on that. And in one of the dialogues, he said, the enemy, he's speaking about who? The Lord, wants people to focus at the condition of their life, their circumstance, and what they need to do right now. So we need to get them thinking about the past. Because if we get them thinking about the past, they will certainly regret. Because we all have stuff in the past that we wish we hadn't done, right? Or the future. Because the future will cause worry, anxiety. Am I going to be able to have enough? Am I going to be able to do this or accomplish that? And so we move it that direction. He said, if we can keep people focused on the past and on the future, we win. Whatever you do, don't let them focus on the present help that they're receiving from the enemy. Are you with me? You follow? And so this whole idea of lack of sophistication works to the advantage of us if we're focused and we're not thinking about too many things. And it also, if we're not thinking about the past or the future, then we're able to lock in on what needs to be done right now. I can't tell you the number of times I've asked the Lord, what do I need to do today? What do I need to do right now? And the Lord has come up with stuff that was not on my radar. It wasn't part of my plans. Children also live a life that's unpretentious. They're not trying to present themselves as somebody they're not. They just let it all hang out, don't they? I mean, children do that. They're not trying to impress people as much. They're just focused on that. And the whole issue that Jesus had with the Pharisees and the Sadducees was what? It was hypocrisy, wasn't it? You hypocrites, you blind guides. He uses the word hypocrite repeatedly. Duplicitous people that are telling you they're one thing, but they're masked. They've got a mask. In fact, as a counselor, I used to counsel people all the time. And one of the biggest issues that a counselor has to deal with is helping a person unmask. Because a lot of times we convince ourselves that the mask is really, it's us. And so we create what we call a presenting person. This is the person we want everybody to see. And if we do that long enough, and if it's not congruent with who we really are, then we end up convincing ourselves that we're that. Are you following me at all? And so the whole job of a counselor is to kind of pull the masks off, take away the pretentiousness and the duplicity, the hypocrisy or whatever, and just get to who the person is. And then it's only then that you can, when the masks come off, that you have the ability. Well, children are unmasked. Trust me. My kids were unmasked when they were little. I mean, they were, Sam, if you're watching, yes, I'm going to use you in an illustration. My son who lives in Colorado, I mean, he's just so in the moment that I would tell him, I said, son, I know you get locked in every Sunday on your friends want to do something and you want to go their place, or can they come over and can we do this and this, that, and the other. But I said, it's very important as a pastor, I need 15 minutes before service and 15 minutes after service where we're not talking about your immediate plans. And I said, do you understand that? I'm just asking for 30 minutes out of a 168, whatever, hour a week. I'm asking for that period of time. And that's probably him calling right there. So he's going to say, Dad, don't tell this story. He's 42 now. He can hold it. But the very next Sunday, I'm talking to somebody and it was a very important conversation. Person's telling me about a trauma in their life, and I'm trying to figure out how, as a church, we can help them. And what did Sam do? He ran up, he's grabbing my leg. Dad, 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 Dad. I said, Sam, remember the conversation that we had the other day? He goes, yeah, but Dad, Dad, Dad. Okay, all right. Are you getting the gist of it there? Okay, all right. There's no masking. You know where the enthusiasm is. You know where the person's life. Unless you can take the worry and surrender it to the Lord. Unless you can take the focus and put it on the Lord. And unless you can take the mask off and just the way you're not trying to be somebody that you're not, we really don't have, in a sense, place, certainly not of greatness in the kingdom of heaven. Fourthly is children don't compare themselves with others. We have to get older to where we are worried about what the Joneses have or something, or whether we're moving up high enough on the ladder or something. Kids typically don't do that. There's a verse in the 10th chapter of 2 Corinthians that says, when we measure ourselves by ourselves, talking about with one another, and compare ourselves with by ourselves, in other words, he says we are not wise. When we measure ourselves by ourselves and compare ourselves with ourselves, we are not wise. So if we're living there, we're living completely horizontally, thinking, am I getting ahead or getting behind in this, rather than am I getting ahead or am I getting behind right here? It's a big difference, isn't it? The last thing I would share about that is there's a sense of living without judgment. Adults have a tendency to judge. Children don't, not nearly as much. They're just having a good time. And it doesn't matter whether the person's a wealthy person and the other person is homeless. The child will play with the other child, right? I mean, there's just this kind of inherent non-judgmental. We have to grow into the judgmentalism that James talks about in James chapter 2, that Jesus talks about when we're looking for special seats at the table. We have to, or looking down on people that are not of our standing, et cetera. We have to kind of grow into that stuff. Sadly, it's the nurturing of the sinful nature as we grow older that becomes the indictment against us. So Jesus is saying here, if I take us kind of to a conclusion of this, is that he takes a paideon, he takes a child to use as an illustration for a larger deal, and he converts it from paideon to mikron, to the micro person. And he says, the person of insignificance, and he converts it, and he said, look, this person is extreme value. In fact, if this weak one has wandered off from the sheep, I'm going to put lots of value. And by the way, if this weak one is struggling in difficulty, I've assigned angels. How much more can you, or less can you understand the value of a person who is laser focused, who's humbled themselves, who's simple before the Lord, whose focus is on the Lord. And so I go back to the beginning, and Jesus says, unless you change, those are the words I read, unless you change and become like the little child, you don't have access to the kingdom. So the understanding is for adults, we have to change in some ways to become less worrisome, less competitive, less judgmental, less sophisticated, less worry-fraught, and fraught with fear and worry. We need to become less of that. And the Lord can break us down and make us more like children. And the older I get, the more I come to the place where I say, that is so true. I've got degrees. I've got a bachelor's and a master's and a doctoral degree. Marlene and I, we have standing, and yet the farther down we go, the more I see it's not any of that stuff. It's the Lord. Richard Padula, where are you? Yeah. We pray at 9 o'clock in the morning, and Richard said something in the context of prayer, and I think before prayer, about it's all by God's grace. It's not us. Something like that, wasn't it, Richard? Yeah. And it's not our doing, it's the Lord's doing. And I would just say, that's the word of the Lord through Judges to Gideon. He's saying, I can't let you do all this stuff on your own. Otherwise, you'd think you did it by yourself, and I had nothing to do with it. So I think we're really being challenged to become like children in that sense, just laser focused and spending time in the Word, and not just praying, but doing what the Lord tells us to do in prayer, and refocusing on what His priorities are for us. And just take all the worry and surrender it to the Lord. Take all the thoughts about, these long-term aspirations or the regrets of the past or judgmentalism toward another person or the competitive urge or all that. Can we just put some of that on hold? I realize that there's anybody that says, well, there's this good piece about that and this good piece about that. I'm speaking in general, what Jesus is saying very clearly, unless you become like a child like this, then you don't even have access to the kingdom. And I think the older we get and the wiser we become, we realize it's the Lord. And so it takes all pretense out. So I'm going to ask you to stand with me, and we're going to pray together as the worship team comes forward to conclude our service.